Well, hello there and welcome to African Perspective here on SABC News Channel. I'm Tshepiso Makwetla. Thank you so much for joining us. So the countdown to South Africa's presidential inauguration has officially started, while the electorate in Mali eagerly await the results of their latest poll. So our top story now, South Africa's President-elect Cyril Ramaphosa has made an undertaking to be the president of all South Africans, and not only for those who voted for the ANC. He was responding to his election as the president of the country in the National Assembly earlier. He was elected unopposed.
And I accordingly declare the Honorable Cyril Matamela Ramaphosa duly elected President of the Republic of South Africa.
I will be a president for all South Africans and not just a president for the African National Congress and those who voted.
And those were his words today, but it's within our hands to forge a more representative, equal and fair United Nations that is empowered and equipped to lead the struggle to end poverty, unemployment and inequality in the world. Those were his words, Cyril Ramaphosa, during his first visit to the United Nations as president last September. It was an occasion when South Africa gifted a bronze statue of Nelson Mandela to the UN with a message that this example should serve as a new dawn for the global organization.
Welcome to New York, Mr. President. Good to see you, sir.
See you. Thank you.
His first visit here was threefold: to convene the Nelson Mandela Peace Summit, address the UN General Assembly and engage UN interlocutors, and finally to allay the concerns of international business and the investor community about the country's socio-political and economic trajectory, including this conversation with former United States President Bill Clinton.
Why should I invest in South Africa right now? What do you say? Last word.
Well, I would say that what we're seeking to do on the land question is to manage risk, to minimize the risk, but at the same time, we're doing a whole lot of other things. We're working on policy issues to ensure that there's policy certainty and consistency. And this we've arrived at after talking to the business sector, to the unions, and we all agree that if we address this, we will begin to see the investment community looking at South Africa in a different way.
His maiden trip to New York as president came after South Africa was elected to a 2-year non-permanent term on the UN Security Council, and after the General Assembly agreed to hold the once-off Nelson Mandela Peace Summit, at which South Africa gifted a life-sized bronze statue of the former president to this organization. A statue that now stands with pride of place at the visitors' entrance to the UN.
It is our deepest hope that this summit, in the name of one of our greatest exemplars of humanity, Nelson Mandela, serves as a new dawn for the United Nations. We hope the summit will give expression to the Secretary General's call for a surge in diplomacy.
Se levanta la sesión.
And with Pretoria's new role in the most powerful decision-making body of the UN, the new president and his team had their work cut out for them, and a great deal of expectation to boot.
When I go back to the issues that I'm very involved in, mass atrocities in the world and the need to stop them from happening and the need for the international community to uphold its responsibility to protect people, these are ideas which Cyril Ramaphosa was literally involved in creating in 2001. He helped coin the phrase responsibility to protect. He was on the intergovernmental panel which made sure that this was adopted by the UN. I think that's a very important thing. I think that's a medal which he should wear on his chest. And so I'm certainly hoping that he will be much more of a leader, both in South Africa and on the global stage who's able to push these kinds of agendas around not just the defense of sovereignty for sovereignty's sake, but sovereignty as responsibility and human rights first.
The UN Secretary General has often talked about South Africa as a key player in the arena of multilateralism.
We congratulate President Ramaphosa on his election. South Africa is playing a leading role in the work of the United Nations and in the support for multilateralism, notably by its presence on the Security Council, its active presence on the Security Council, and all of the support South Africa and the South African Defense Forces bring to UN peacekeeping, both in terms of material, in terms of men and women, and in terms of leadership.
As the issue of Palestinian and Sahrawi independence and the reform of the United Nations with a greater role for Africa become key international pillars of Ramaphosa's full term as president.
The history of the global economy informs us that no country can prosper at the expense of all others, and that no people can hope to live in comfort as well as in security for as long as millions of others languish in poverty. It is therefore essential that we take collective responsibility for the development of all nations and for the improvement of the lives of all people.
With a promise to this august assembly that this would be the generation that changes the world. The world, Mr. President, is waiting. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.
Africa must pay attention to the challenges facing young people on the continent. Speaking during the launch of Africa Day, economic advisor to the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, Trudy Makanya, says South Africa supports the regional integration. They will focus on attracting African investors to South Africa, she said.
The continent is obviously very important in terms of the source of investment funds into South Africa, but also South African companies investing into the rest of the continent. So there's an important intra-African investment theme that we would like to pursue in our investment mobilization drive. In terms of the commitments that were made at last year's inaugural investment conference, there were 300 billion rand of commitments made there, and one of the most significant ones was by the Mara Group, where Mara is developing a smartphone factory in South Africa, the first smartphone factory that we have in the country. And I say significant because, you know, it's in a technologically driven sector. It's bringing important intellectual property into the country, and it shows that we can have different hubs across the continent that drive the industrialization process. We also had Strive Masiyiwa from Econet as a prominent participant in that conference, and subsequently Econet is also is currently investing in the country. Invest SA, our investment facilitation organ, has facilitated investments from Dangote from Nigeria, from Azam Bakresha Group from Tanzania, from Owanda in Nigeria, and from Chobis in Botswana.
Thanks, Gary. And on a more serious note, load shedding is back.
Here, all that's serious deserves a glass of not so serious. Come fill yours with J&B blended Scotch whiskey. Get a 750ml bottle for just $159.99. Only from Tops at Spar. Not for persons under the age of 18.
In my time, I've truly seen it all firsthand. Angizwanga ngizibonele ngalawam amehlo. Going through my photographs and reflecting on my memory box really brings back many life experiences that are bittersweet and humbling. In this, my homeland, I've entertained tourists and offshore traders. I've evolved from dealing with the battering system to trading foreign exchange. I've traveled to the ends of the world and tasted a diversity of culinary palates. To outsiders, I have lived alongside wild animals, tamed some, and collected livestock as wealth. So my memory box is overflowing. And don't get me wrong, I'm not bragging, but in fact, I'm breaking and hurting deep down inside of this heart of mine. Why? What for? I hear you ask yourself, my fellow Africans, friends and family. The images I have of me are those of the point of view of my onlooker, not those of myself, the subject at hand. I'm choking and suffocating at the chalice those anthropologists and filmmakers tie around me as some sort of grand name tag. Stories have been made and told of me, not of my own words. Films and graphic images have entertained millions of audiences at my expense.
And welcome back. Counting is underway in Malawi's 6th presidential and 16th parliamentary election. The country went to the polls on Tuesday. It has been dubbed Malawi's most unpredictable presidential poll yet. The country's incumbent, President Peter Mutharika, is running for a second term in office. He faces opposition from his own deputy, Saulus Chilima, and former Baptist preacher Lazarus Chakwera. The election is a first since a new law forced parties to declare large donations and banned the once common practice by candidates of giving cash handouts. Food shortages, graft scandals and ballooning external debt have hurt Mutharika's popularity while in office. So now to unpack the latest developments in Malawi, we are joined by Victor Shiley of Shiley Stone Elections and Governance Consultants. He talks to us about the counting process which is underway. A very good evening to you and welcome. Let's first start with what the status quo is. Earlier on in the day, the Electoral Commission was saying by midday they had only had 20% of the results counted. It would seem by some this is moving rather slowly and unduly so. What is your opinion of?
Thank you, Zepiso, for having me on your show. Yes, indeed, the results are trickling in very slowly. And this is to be understood because the infrastructure for retrieval of materials and transmission of results is not as modern as you would have, for instance, the case we had in South Africa a few weeks ago.
What are the salient differences?
Well, one, that they have some inaccessible places, and they have to physically ferry the election residue back to the constituency tally centers. So it's quite, an involved exercise that requires patience, which is, I think, something that all of us have the responsibility to keep on reminding Malawians that the Electoral Commission of Malawi has up to 8 days to announce the results. We know that there's often impatience among the media and commentators to suggest that maybe there's a delay. But I think they are doing fairly well.
But let's talk about the source of the impatience. For instance, the Malawi Congress Party's Lazarus Chakwera, for instance, threatening that he could contest the election outcome if his party agents are not allowed to sign off on the results. Isn't that due process then? Why would there be questions raised about that? Because he seems to suggest that it's not happening in other places.
Well, I was actually surprised to hear the comments because that is part of the procedures. Party agents, they call them poll monitors. They are supposed to sign off on the results once they have finished counting. And there was a training conducted by civil society organizations and the Electoral Commission I was lucky to contribute to the design of the content for that training and also for the supervisors for each of the parties. I just returned from Malawi yesterday. So I don't expect that any monitor would not know that they're supposed to sign off on the results.
But by the Electoral Commission's own admissions, there have been quite a number of anomalies. We've seen that even Solos Chilema's voting district was changed, where his name was supposed to be was moved to another. We've seen ballot papers meant for one district going to another. We've seen misplaced ballot papers. This is all by the Electoral Commission's own admissions. So it would seem that there are concerns to be had.
Yes, indeed. Well, admittedly, as they have already acknowledged, there have been some operational challenges, but not really of the magnitude that would cast doubts on the integrity of the process. I must point out that unlike some of the electoral commissions in the SADC region, the Malawi Electoral Commission does not have its own staff completely at the subnational level. So you then end up with a situation where there's too many new people engaged for the running of the elections, and I suspect that sort of problems that you have highlighted can be attributable to the lack of adequate training for the temporary staff.
Is it a lack of funding? Why would they not have their own staff?
It could be a lack of funding, but in terms of the institution itself, in the districts, the government officials called district commissioners are the ones who preside over elections. Unlike in our case here, where you would have the provincial electoral officers with fully fledged human resources component and infrastructure. In Malawi, it's different. Elections in terms of the administration at the subnational level are really treated as an event, and therefore they don't have permanent staff.
Let's talk about international observers are saying that they seem to be largely happy with the process so far. What does the African Union say?
We are yet to hear the preliminary statement by the African Union, but indeed, if you were to compare these elections with the 2014 elections, there is a huge difference. There were high levels of political tolerance, and notwithstanding the fact that there was a throat-cutting contest between the three leading parties, the DPP, Malawi Congress Party, and of course the new one, UTM. But there has been really relatively peaceful elections, and we are quite encouraged.
And notwithstanding, also a member of parliament caught dishing out money at a primary school, as we mentioned earlier on in the introduction, that has been outlawed. So largely credible, is that what you're saying?
At this point, I would say largely credible.
I want to talk about the environment for media freedom. As you say, you've just returned from there. What is the sense that you're getting? Because the media are protesting today about an alleged broadcasting blackout. Some say it lasted for 3 hours, some say for several hours into the night. Is that not of concern on highly contested elections like this? It's
certainly a worrying trend, SABC, across the African continent, that there has been an attempt in some countries, Malawi included, to black out the media. I think it's a worrying trend. There were allegations that this was going to happen, that there was going to be a complete social media blackout, but of course it didn't happen at the scale at which the allegations were made to be. But still, even if it was 3 hours, it's enough for anything to happen. And this kind of things really tarnish the integrity of the elections.
I want to talk about media ownership, because that's also very important. Just looking at that blackout, it was said that the Malawi Broadcasting Corporation wasn't really much affected by the interruption, while Zodiac Broadcasting Station and Time TV were hindered from broadcasting, including also independent radio station. How much of that is a factor? We've seen in other African countries that some of the candidates actually own their own media stadia.
It was to be expected. As in other countries in the region, media is often polarized between governing party and opposition parties. The Malawi Broadcasting Corporation was almost exclusively covering the DPP, both their radio stations and television. And when you look at Zodiac, it tended to give more airtime to the opposition parties. So it is to be expected, therefore, that you would have this kind of things happening. Yeah.
I want to look at some of the election results that are trickling in, and I want you to tell me whether or not they reflect some of what you've seen in campaigning and what people are saying, the electorate on whom they support. It seems that Mutharika's DPP is still holding on to the southern stronghold. Chakwera's MCP seems to be having a big showing in central region, and UTM in the urban areas such as Blantyre and Longwe. Is this consistent with what you saw?
Indeed. You see, I think one thing that our viewers need to understand also is that Malawi operates some kind of regional politics. In fact, for the presidential candidates, they also operate what is called a running mate system. That means the candidate has to pick up a running mate. You would find that in choosing the running mates, they usually try to get people from different regions to maximize electoral economies of scale. And that you see also in the results as they come out, that certain candidates tend to be stronger in some regions of the three regions, like you are saying. And Chakwera, it was expected that he will perform well in the urban areas as well, because he commands a youthful support. So, and these are usually resident in urban areas. So this would give
Chilema a run for his money?
Well, I'm not sure that the UTM will actually make a huge dent to the DPP. I think the real contest is between the DPP and the MCP based on what we have seen in the run-up to elections, but also from the very small indications emerging from polling stations. I think the contest is going to be between Reverend Chakwera and President Mutharika.
So let's talk about the murmurings of dissatisfaction that have come out from some quarters, including Lazarus Chakwera. You said the Malawi Electoral Commission does have 8 days to complete counting. What would be too long to force a rerun if there is unhappiness with the length of time that it's taken?
Well, first of all, in terms of their electoral system, there's not even a runoff. And this is one of the problems with Malawi, that they operate a first-past-the-post electoral system with a very low threshold. In other countries, as you would know, we have observed elections with you before, there is a threshold of a 50+1% for anybody to win the presidency. In Malawi, that doesn't exist. In fact, if you look at the 2014 elections, then President Mutharika won by 36.4% of the total votes cast, and that is very low to give anybody a mandate to say that they have really, popular mandate from the communities. So that is the problem, and this is one of the things I think that is already creating uncertainties with some candidates already alleging corruption, because they know that it does not matter how much one gets. 1 vote, 2 votes is too many for anybody to win the presidency.
I mean, it was interesting to hear the MEC's Justice answer saying that there's some sort of evil that is operating in the counting process. And I mean, you're talking about something that is so intangible, and we're talking about the need for results that should be verifiable, that should be tangible. What needs to improve, not only like electoral systems, but how we perceive them, for Africans to believe that they do have worthy democratic processes?
It is an interesting question, but you see, I always say that for people to look at elections merely from a perspective of this being an event, or even a process for that matter, is to me short-sighted. We need to always also consider the political economy of elections. So what you are seeing at play in Malawi has little really to do in terms of the number of votes that any of the candidates gets. It is also the underlying motives for people to run for presidency, for people to run for a parliament, and that against the background of a very feeble economic situation in Malawi, we can expect that people will not accept results easily.
And that certainly is a conversation to definitely be picked up and continued another day. Thank you so much for your time and insights, Victor Shale of Shale Stone Elections and Governance Consultants. Well, that's where we leave it for tonight. African Perspective this Wednesday. The Globe is coming up next. From all of us here, thanks for joining us and good night.
From the beginning, South Africans turned to SABC News for credible coverage of the election journey. We took you there.
Everybody very keen, as they say, to cast their vote. What they're saying they want is change.
We were with you on the campaign trail.
A lot of South Africans having taken to the poll. Now the dust is finally settling.
As South Africa prepares to turn a new page,
South Africans deserve to live in a South Africa where they can be prosperous.
Join SABC News for comprehensive coverage as President-elect Cyril Ramaphosa is inaugurated. A future reimagined, Africa rising.
And that is the South Africa that I am working for.
I use my name first and foremost. That's all I heard. And from using the name, I got a small loan of 8,000 rand.
I remember there is a time la sa zama kumfunela umsebenzi.
Did you know the big hole digging started in 1871 and ended on the 14th August 1914? The hole produced 2,722 kgs of diamonds. However, one diamond as huge as 490 carat of stone found in the open prior 1868 gave them the interest to dig. Extracted from 22.5 million tons of soil. Today, the hole sits at a breathtaking 214 meters deep. Kimberley Big Hole attracts tourists from all over the world, taking a vintage tram past the city, then cycling around the Big Hole.
Solani Mkiva says that they believe that the king should be released and that they are not being opportunistic.
The last 4 years, we have been engaging with government. It cannot be a post-colonial government that begins to jail a king in a context of what actually happened.
Bobby Solomons, he's the spokesperson of the Alex Shutdown Committee, the multi-billion rand Alexander Renewal Project. Nothing came of that.
Community wants to know what really happened to the monies.
The creative director of the label, Mansu, that of course means black is beautiful in Sesotho. What has been your experience in that regard, given some of the more established labels that you have managed to work with?
It is hard. 15 years is a long time. There's a lot of sacrifice for your family to make for you.
This is the thing.
Wearing without the brief.
This is it this morning.
In a UN report, scientists say climate change is getting worse.
1/3 of our food sources for the population come out of the ocean.
We spoke to people who have been directly affected.
We have lost a lot of cattle. Gemsbok-vlakte, Tosca gebied and Jakkalskop. Everywhere you will see there's animals dying.
I've lost 2 of my cattle this January.
Africa's demand for clean drinking water is rising.
Drinking water is a top priority.
The next day when the water comes back, it's dirty.
I have implemented a level 5 water restriction, effective immediately.
Environmentalists seek solution to preserve the planet.
This is Cape Kirpa, which is also one of the endemic species that is only found within the Western Cape, so it occurs nowhere else in the world except in our water systems.
The Now Post Lifetime reporter.
We are told that some of them were nabbed by IEC officials whilst trying to vote for a second time.
That date, June 24th, is significant. It comes just before the G20 meeting taking place in Osaka, Japan.
This is an unprecedented joint inquiry by the Human Rights Commission as well as the Public Protector's Office.